everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I want to talk a little bit about something kind of depressing, to be honest, but I know that y'all rely on me to kind of keep my finger on the pulse of publishing as much as I can and kind of talk about and discuss trends that I am seeing. And I have been noticing lately a shift in kind of the impacts that COVID-19 is having on publishing. Some of these changes I've known for a little while. Some of the things I'm observing, I'm still not 100% sure I know what the trends I'm seeing mean, and I think that everyone feels that way right now. I think agents, publishers, authors, we're all trying to figure out the new status quo. But very recently I've observed things that I just wanted to share, and many of you have asked me for this kind of update since I made a video, I think in March, saying, well, you might as well query because agents are still reading, they're just a little bit slow. Yes, and. So I will start off with advice about querying in this current market. So multiple things are happening at the same time. YA as a market in particular was already saturating, and we were already seeing shifts and changes before the global pandemic, and the global pandemic has just really kind of intensified some of the shifts that we were already seeing. For quite some time, honestly, I have been advising any writer who directly asks me for advice that if their heart and soul is not in YA, if you don't bleed for YA, if it is not your dream and all that you hold in your heart and all that you read and all that you want to write, that if entirely possible, if you have any other idea or inclination to write adult, to write middle grade, what have you, I encourage you to do that. I have been encouraging people to do that only because YA is a tougher market. That doesn't mean give up on YA. I just clarify for people about the lifeblood and the passion, because what I think happened, and we do this for a while, that YA was buzzy for such a long time and it wasn't saturated for a very long time. It was the place to write and sell a book. I think a lot of us kind of got excited about YA and got into YA, and there was this idea that, well, if you get into YA, you just kind of burp out this fun teen book and they're gonna give you $500,000. And yeah, YA has a lot of big splashy deals, but we are no longer in that boom market for YA. That boom market ended a couple of years ago, and it's just as hard to succeed to break into YA as it always kind of has been to break out in other already saturated categories. Like, most adult categories are already saturated and they had kind of a pretty healthy but conservative market. YA had a ultra healthy liberal market for a long time, meaning publishers had tons of money, they bought hundreds of titles, and a ton of people got into YA. That era is over, and that is not news. But the global pandemic has further exacerbated something that already existed, and mostly it shifted what is selling. If you watched my interviews with my agent Alana Roth-Parker and Tao Lei in, I think that was March and April, maybe it was into May, they both said basically the same thing. They had the same thing that they had been seeing in the submission trenches from editors and were feeling for their own query inboxes and their own prediction of what was going to happen. And so I'm reporting that that is still true. For the most part, houses are acquiring fun, escapist reads. Rom-coms are back in a huge way. If you have a light, fun, romantic YA, now is your time. But also, light, fun fantasies. Fantasies, they're harder to sell. That has been the case for approximately a year. But if they're fitting kind of that mood of the current market, they have a shot. This doesn't mean dark books are dead, by the way. They're just harder to push through. Harder, not impossible. That said, I am seeing more and more feedback from more and more people that now is not the time to query anything pandemic adjacent. So you do need to be careful about anything that's kind of dystopian, viral outbreaks, etc. It remains a very tricky market for those books. So that's the market, but specific to querying, it's even slower than I think anyone thought it would be. The overwhelming majority of agents are women, and many of them have children, and as the overwhelming burden of childcare continues to fall primarily on women, not all households, but in many of them, a large number of agents now have to homeschool their kids, and it has completely changed workload dynamics. So one of the trends I'm reporting to you that I've heard, a lot of agents are finding that they're having to pass on material that they might have said yes to a year ago because they literally do not have the bandwidth to properly serve new clients because there are all these more new demands on their time and they need to continue to serve their existing clients. So many agents are closing to queries. Many agents are pulling back the number of offers they make, and thus I would say right now is not the healthiest query market. Unless you have something, like I mentioned, those light escapist reads. Either way, we're almost at the end of August anyway. If you were thinking of querying right now, don't do it. We are in a weird publishing summer, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I would even be a little bit wary of querying in September. I do think that things might start to shift in October, November. But if you were at all in a position where you could do one more revision, you could send it to more critique partners, you might want to enter a pitch contest, something like Pitch Wars Now or Author Mentor Match in the spring. Yes, round 8 is happening in the spring. I'm looking to open that in January, and more will be announced soon. Now is a better time than any other time before to hold off on querying and do more of kind of that elbow work on manuscripts, because part 2 of what I have been observing, I know several people who are querying at different levels, and what I'm seeing over and over again, the trends that I'm seeing where I'm kind of trying to analyze, and I think this is the gist, and it definitely echoes what I'm hearing on the submission level. Now is not the time to take a chance on a slightly rougher manuscript on the hopes that an agent will fall so in love with a premise that they're willing to kind of take you on as a project. I am seeing an overwhelming shift where most agents will not take on fixer-uppers right now, essentially. Even editorial agents, they're looking for super polished work if they are going to be making an offer. And something I'm seeing, because I guess this is a separate trend, but I need to insert it because it's relevant to querying and polished manuscripts. A lot of people are switching agents. I've just seen a lot of authors who they're popping up and they have new representation. I think a lot of people, especially those who are between contracts, are taking this opportunity to evaluate their agent relationships. So we're just seeing a lot of internal shuffling. What this means for you as a querying writer is that you are in the query trenches with authors who are querying with established brands, with option material, and they're basically an easier bet for an agent. So an agent who might not sign a debut work that needs some polish might take on a new client, but that new client is an already published author. Just something to bear in mind. It's really about putting your best foot forward with your work. And if you are even halfway on the fence about querying, I honestly recommend you not query right now. That's not going to last forever. I mean, literally like now for like the next 3 to 4 weeks, I would pull back, in part because so now I'm going to talk about the weirdest publishing summer ever. So publishing summer is notoriously slow because normally people use the summer to go places. This publishing summer, on the querying end, it's slower than ever for the reasons I already discussed. But in submission land, in editors buying books land, it is not slow at all. Because of remote working, everyone is suddenly available during the summer for things like acquisition meetings. And that's what would often get put on hold in the summer. It was never like, you can't go on submission in the summer. You could go on submission in the summer, and I know people who sold in the summer. It just took longer to sell in the summer because of coordinating vacation schedules. Well, now, Publishing actually needs to buy books. That part of publishing is not on hold. Though, I'm going to talk about some fiscal changes. Because we've had a weird market, and actually the 2022 and 2023 YA lists, we haven't seen a ton of debut sales for those lists. They're buying them now, so you've probably been seeing a lot of deals announced in the past couple of months. And one, a ton of those were sold before the global crisis got really, really bad. So there is a delay in some of those sales, but some of them have indeed happened during this weird publishing summer because publishers have to fill their list and they need to sell books to keep the lights on. They might totally change the payment structure, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about, but they are buying books. I know multiple people who have sold books this summer. They've sold in an auction this summer. They've sold for good money this summer. Publishing is still buying books, and thus, a lot of those agents you're querying are busy making book deals, which is really, really good. But it definitely means, and I've noticed specifically where I know an agent has someone going to auction this week, and I know someone who queried that agent, and I know that agent hasn't responded to that query. Well, it's because they're selling books, which of course is what you want them to do. And you have to always keep in mind that balance for an agent. They always need to serve their existing clients well. So we're just in an unprecedented situation where it's a very busy publishing summer for sales. And I think we're going to go into an equally busy fall. Now, I already talked about the market. What has shifted is what is selling and the types of books that are selling. But as I mentioned, if you have a rom-com, it's time to dust off that rom-com because they are selling. I mentioned payment structures. I teased that. So that's another change I'm hearing. I haven't concretely had someone who went through it, but I've heard rumblings and agents have talked about it in response to the global crisis. And this is literally just a fiscal thing they have to do because all these corporations around the world are hurting for money. All companies are hurting for money right now in a very weird economy. Advances in some cases, not all, there are always going to be 7-figure book deals. Advances I'm hearing, are a little lower for some people, and some of them have very weird payment schedules. It's a way for the publishers to move the money around like a shell game so that they can pay people. Basically, I'm hearing of book deals that aren't 3 or 4 payments, they're 5 or 6 payments now, which just kind of drags out the payment schedule. So there are all these different kind of shifts and changes to that part of the industry that agents are dealing with for existing authors who are selling books. So that's definitely an effect of COVID. And publishing is definitely just generally, we're still watching and waiting and learning how they're adjusting in terms of how do we market books? Our authors can't go to events, online events. We've heard horror stories of Zooms that were poorly run by bookstores that got basically racist trolls on them. We don't know when we're going to go back to book events and when things will go back to normal. Almost across the board, no one I know with a book out in 2021, with only a couple of exceptions, are getting physical ARCs because the printers were closed for such a long time, which is another reason a lot of books got bumped, by the way. Oh, that's the other problem we're facing. Just hundreds of titles dropping on a single day because everyone got bumped at the same time. And it's 2021 titles are moving around, but for example, I'm probably not going to get physical ARCs for the Ivies, which is a huge bummer, to be perfectly honest. But it's also kind of shrug emoji if that's the worst thing that happens to me because of this. I'm gonna STFU. But those are definitely some shifts and changes that we're seeing from the global crisis. And I just imagine it's probably gonna impact print runs. It already has been impacting print runs, but I assume it's gonna continue to impact print runs. It's definitely impacted some of the cover treatments I've seen on physical books. And I think we'll continue to kind of feel our way through those changes. I do think we're going to see shifts in publishing, but they're not going to stop buying books. They are going to buy particular kinds of books that they think can sell in this new market. And let's bring it back to, what do you do if you're an aspiring writer and you have a book and you're still trying to do the thing? Don't give up, first of all. But as I mentioned, if you have even halfway been thinking, I could do another pass on this manuscript, do it. Or you could let a manuscript that's in really good shape sit, write a new project. Do NaNoWriMo in November. Do your own NaNoWriMo before November. I am currently drafting right now. Work on something new. If you have had something up your sleeve that's like a fun escapist book, now is the time to write it. It also means you really have to pay attention to the field of agents right now, just because I'm seeing like a lot more agents are closed to queries than they have been in the past. You have to kind of have an eagle eye of when they're closing, when they're opening back up. It might be worth waiting to query because a specific agent is closed. And you know, in a normal situation, I wouldn't tell you not to query because someone is closed. I had a dream agent on my list, though you know how I feel about them, but regardless, I always will wonder, she was closed both times I was querying. I just had monumentally bad luck, but no regrets. Everything's great. But in this current publishing climate, if someone you really have your eye on is closed, you might as well wait. So that's kind of where I am falling. The situation is developing. This is like developing news, and this is where it sits right now in the 3rd week of August. But particularly in the last 2 weeks, I have heard stories from multiple people in the query trenches that, you know, agents are saying they can't take on new clients because of COVID, because they're homeschooling their kids. There are agents where it's like they can't take on new clients because they have to serve their existing clients during what might be a very tricky, crowded fall. Another interesting impact we're seeing of the global crisis, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better, is we're seeing literal shifts with agents and agencies. I have seen a lot of agents leaving their agencies, leaving the business, a lot of new agencies being started, and I cannot emphasize enough, do your research, look for red flags. I will link down below to my videos. I am screaming at you through my camera, just not literally. Please, 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 please look at experience, qualifications. I mean, that's it when someone starts their own agency. Where did they work before? And if they don't say specifically where, I've seen some that are just like, has interned for agents for 4 years. Who? Because who matters? Have they ever worked at a publisher? What are their credentials for starting a literary agency? Because a whole bunch, at least 4 that I can think of, have been started in the last month, and they're all schmagencies. They are not good agencies. They are not qualified to represent and sell books, and agents have been calling them out on Twitter. So more than ever before, protect yourself, because a lot of people are using the global situation, being at home, and shifts in the industry to start their own agencies, which is the worst timing ever, especially when someone's not qualified, because now more than ever, editors are not going to be taking chances on or buying books from someone they've never heard of who has no qualifications to be an agent. They are looking for very polished work from agents they trust. But there's also legitimate moves that are happening. Agents who are moving agencies, agents who are leaving agenting altogether. So when agents leave the business, their clients get shuffled around to new agents, and that kind of movement can definitely impact how many new debut aspiring authors agents can take on. Now, some of the new agents and agencies cropping up are good, so just do your research. Another trend that comes from the events of June is we're seeing a lot of agencies put their money where their mouth is and diversifying their agents who are at the agency. So there's some really great new names coming up at A-list agencies. I encourage you to query those agents because they're brand new, they're gonna be hungry, and they're being taken care of at good agencies. So when it comes to new agents, as always, just look at where they work and who is training them. There are some actually great opportunities now with some new agents at agencies. I'm also seeing agents who are at great agencies starting their own agencies. And if they were at great agencies and have an amazing sales record, they're a good bet. So that is kind of the COVID-19 publishing general update of the moment. Tread carefully with your querying. If you are querying, be very thoughtful about who you are querying. Polish those manuscripts. This is not the time to be querying a fixer-upper because far fewer agents are taking on time-intensive projects, even the editorial agents. And submission chugs along. I'm actually really keen to see how things go in the fall. I think it's going to be a really interesting submission season, and that's where it is. I will continue to keep an eye on things, and probably, I imagine things will shift and change again toward the end of the year, and I might do another update. So in the meantime, let me know down below if you have any questions. If I hear anything interesting, I will let you know. And before I leave you, take a deep breath. Don't freak out. This won't last forever. It's just a very weird time. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and I'll make more analytical publishing videos. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and happy writing.